Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. Today, I have a new guest with me. He's from outside of our organization. His name is Ted Harrington. He's a leader of ethical hackers who helps companies build a better, more secure software. He's an author, a keynote speaker, a consultant, and a fellow podcast host specializing in penetration testing, secure software development, and other related areas of cybersecurity. How are you, Ted?
I'm great. Excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's so nice to have you. I'm really excited to talk about this topic today. I wanted to talk with you about why it's so important to start thinking like a hacker and stop thinking like a defender. And I want you to kind of explain why this philosophy is so important in the first place.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's one of the absolute most central ideas to all of security, but definitely the corner of security that I come from, ethical hacking. What I think we should do is we should probably define what a hacker even is, because what most people probably consider that term to be is based on what, the media might describe a hacker as, which is usually pretty wrong. The media usually portrays a hacker as an evil person who's some sort of wrongdoing. And many hackers are that. But that's actually not really the appropriate definition of a hacker. A hacker is neither good nor bad. A hacker is a problem solver. A hacker is somebody who looks at something and says, hey, it's supposed to do X, but can I make it do Y? And that's really the fundamental basis of what a hacker is. That's neither good nor bad. The fork in the road that separates good from bad comes to motivation. And so the bad hackers, the ones who say, well, I want to make a system that's supposed to do a certain thing and make it do a different thing, and they want to do it for some sort of malicious outcome, that's what most people think of as a hacker. But the other side, the people who want to find those vulnerabilities in systems because they want to see them to be broken, that's where the good guys come from. That's where people from my corner of the world, ethical hackers, come from. And so the idea of thinking like a hacker comes down to this idea of we have to look at a system in order to understand how it can be broken. And a metaphor that I often will use to try to make this relatable is if we think about, I think it's pretty much a universal condition that no one likes standing in line, right? Just universally, no one likes standing in line to wait for things. Some people are more okay with it than others, but no one likes it. And a line is a great example of a system. And the system, basically, if you think of what the line gets you into, maybe it's, I don't know, a concert or a nightclub or something. You wait in that line, you wait for a period of time. At the end, you have to pay to enter the place. Lines typically have those fundamentals to them. And what a hacker would do is a hacker would look at that and say, well, how can I get into that place without waiting in line or without paying to go inside? And unless we ask those questions and say, like, where's the weak point? How would I do that? How would I get in without doing this the way that everyone else does it? If we don't ask those questions, we'll never actually see the weakness. And that's why this idea is so important, is that most people are wired to think about the way things are supposed to happen, right? The system says, I want to understand how the system works and I want to do what the system is requiring me to do. But what a hacker does is says the system is supposed to have me do these things, but can I make it do something different? And by asking those questions, we now find out the places where maybe assumptions were bad about how the system would work or how people would interact with the system. And, if we go back to our line metaphor, that's how people get into bars or restaurants or clubs or experiences all the time without waiting in line, because they say, how can I not wait in that line? And they talk their way in through the VIP host or whatever. And by asking those questions, that's how we ultimately improve systems.
But I guess the difference is once they get in, there's not a whole lot of data or things or items for them to take, right? So talk to us about what is it that these hackers, who are they and what is it that they want? What is it that they're trying to take once they get into your systems?
Yeah, I love that question. There's a long answer to that, but I'm going to try to keep it as simple and short as I can. Different attackers attack for different reasons. And that's the most important takeaway from this question that we can take, is that it is not a single answer. A lot of people think, oh, well, attackers will, they'll attack a system because they want to get something to make money. And profit is a really compelling motive. A lot of attackers are motivated by profit, but that's not the only type of attacker. Attackers will attack in order to obtain some sort of geopolitical gain. Like that's what a nation state might be after. They might attack in order to gain a competitive advantage. That's what corporate espionage is about. They might attack simply to gain a name for themselves. And that's what casual or small group hackers are about. And so what's really important is we have to realize that every organization has certain things that they must protect. Different attacker groups might want those things for different reasons. And we have to marry those two in order to understand what the threat really is. And that requires us to think bigger than just, I have money, someone's going to steal money. It's not quite that. It might be that maybe I work at a large company that has a very prominent brand, and a hacktivist, like a group called Anonymous, they'll attack organizations in order to make a political statement. They're not stealing anything. They're just defacing your webpage, for example, in order to say, like, we stand against whatever cause. So
right. And
short
at the
answer,
end of the day, that value is just as critical as if they were to steal money or something like that, right? Like, that's horrible to happen to an organization.
You're spot on that it's not just about money, and the outcome could be bad for any organization depending on what it is that organization protects. And one thing that you'll often hear is people say some version of like, oh, I'm just a small company. No one would attack me? Like, I don't have any money. Or relative to, like a Fortune 10 enterprise, I don't have any money. And that's actually a really bad assumption to make, because what small companies might have is they might have the ability to attack other companies that maybe are their customers, or they might have, maybe they only have 20 employees in this small company, but all 20 of those employees file tax returns, and all 20 of those employees have social security numbers, whose social security numbers can be used to open lines of credit. And so there's all kinds of ways to think about it. And so that's where this think like a hacker really comes from, is, okay, how would a nation state think about this victim? How would organized crime think about this victim? How would a hacktivist think about this victim? How should we think about the insider threat versus an external attacker? Because by thinking in that way and sort of thinking a little more maliciously, we're now able to see where the weak points are.
So you talk about this mindset of thinking like a hacker. Well, give us, your top tips for doing that. I mean, how do we transition from this mindset of constantly focusing on how we defend to being on the other side?
It's both a hard question and an easy question. So it's hard because not everyone's wired to think that way. It's sort of like, I don't know if you've seen The Matrix, but in this movie, everyone's sort of in this reality, and then they unplug. But for anyone who has it, you unplug from the reality, and once you're unplugged, you're like, I don't know, this new reality is kind of not as awesome as like the fake reality was, right? And so that's kind of what it's like once you start looking at the world with this malicious mindset. You can't really go back, and it's not really for everybody. And so that's the first part. Like, it's hard for people to all think like an attacker, but the beauty of it is I actually don't think that everybody does need to think like a hacker. What needs to happen is the organization needs to have that capability. So that's where you either have a person, a department within your organization who thinks that way, or ideally you're working with an outside organization who that's their whole job, is to think like an attacker. And that's really how you solve it. And the beauty of that is that's really easy to obtain, because it's literally hiring somebody. You don't have to go change your mind.
Right. And not to interrupt you, but, so you don't think that employee by employee should have that mindset? You think it's more of like an IT or, a certain department that should have that mindset, who's constantly like, I guess, more aware and of the mindset of being a hacker? Because, from my perspective, when I receive an email, every email I receive, I'm like suspect of it, And so I guess my question is, you don't think that person to person in an organization should think that way?
It's a good clarification. What I meant to say was, I do think that everybody should try to think this way, but I recognize not everybody will be able to.
Right.
And so if what an organization is thinking is just like, okay, well, let's just have everybody think like an attacker, and that is their whole thinking alone, and they don't combine it with someone whose pure job is to think that way. You really need to have someone, a group, a department, an outside company who their whole job is to think that way. But you're 100% right. Everybody should be doing exactly what you're doing, being skeptical of those emails that come in and it's like, oh, your prize has arrived. Click here to claim it. And you're like,
Well, yeah, I mean, they're getting more sophisticated nowadays. Like they can easily pull information about you from LinkedIn or from your company website and go on there and actually try to use personal, which I'm sure you're aware of this, but use personal details to kind of like catfish you into thinking, hey, maybe this is legit. Just click on this one link, and then all of a sudden your whole computer's compromised.
Yeah, what you're describing is what's called social engineering, and it's an incredibly effective technique that basically is intended to trick somebody. And it's to trick somebody by being perceived as credible. And the way you're perceived as credible, like the way that we perceive credibility when someone's asking something of us is, do they know certain things? And when someone can call and say, hey, I'm so-and-so from such and such bank, and this person's like, yep, I bank there. And they can say even one additional piece of information that's like, yep, that is true. This person is now very likely to give up that information. And unfortunately, it's, a lot of people fall victim to that. It's a very, very effective technique.
Do you think that people should attempt to have like less information online, or how would you say that people could combat that?
That's certainly one thing to do, is to be more careful about what you share online. But personally, I feel like the horse is out of the barn on that. The information about you that would be used in a social engineering attack is out there, even if it's not on social media. It's available. And so instead, what I think people should do is that they should assume that anytime someone is emailing them or calling them or sending them something, and they are presenting themselves as some organization or person, they should do exactly what you just said before, which is they should be skeptical of it. And so anytime that someone sends you something in an email and it says, click this link to do whatever, if it's legit, there's a way to do that action without clicking that link. So for example, today people will sign contracts all the time via something like, for example, DocuSign or one of those signing platforms. And it's like, click here to sign. It will, if it's legitimate, it will also include for you an identifier so you can go yourself to DocuSign's website and say, hey, I want to sign this contract. You put in the identifier and it will take you to it. So that's a way that you can get around the, receiving them. Well, you'll still receive the malicious email, but get around actually clicking it. So being skeptical is, I think, the most effective technique.
Yeah, and I think just being aware of the personal natural behaviors of the emails as well. My boss isn't going to send me an email asking for me to buy 38 Amazon gift cards. I mean, if he did, wow, Merry Christmas. But that's just not natural, normal behavior from him. So it's just, I think, being aware and cognizant of those things. Well, gosh, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I want, listeners to be able to find you if they were looking for you. So can you tell us where, if you have a website, what your podcast is?
Yeah, definitely. Super easy. The place for all the information is tedharrington.com. So if you want to know more about my book or the podcast or just connect with me on social media, it's all right there. Just go to tedharrington.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Hopefully we can chat with you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.